Bodie, we ready? I'd like to call this meeting of the Coventry Town Council to order at 6:34 p.m. Clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Pasqua.
Here.
Councilmember Ludwig.
Here.
Councilmember Shockley.
Here.
Vice President LeBlanc.
Here.
President Lima.
Here. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In the event of an emergency, you can exit out the rear doors and head out to your left for the back parking lot or to the front lawn. Moving on to public comment on undocketed items only. Are there any members of the public who have a comment on docketed items here in council chambers? Moving to Zoom, any member of the public who has public comment on docketed items? Going once, going twice, 3 times. Public comment on docketed items is closed. We'll now invite the school committee to come up to the dais to have a joint work session on the budget. Chairman Pearson, please call your meeting to order.
Call the Coventry School Committee meeting to order at 6:38 p.m. Do a roll call. Anna Dos Reis Couto,
Here.
Bradford Mayor,
Here.
and John Cambio and Dave Florio are absent. I am
Members of the council and school committee, we're here tonight to review the Town of Coventry Public Schools budget for FY24. These binders were sent to the council over the weekend to review. At this time, I will turn it over to Superintendent Don Cowart to kind of give an introduction. And unless anyone would like him to go in depth on certain items, we'll follow the format we did last night, and where if you have questions you've marked previously on specific items, he can answer them that way, and we'll go through kind of in order. Mr. Cowart, floor is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So we took a different approach this year with our budget. We spent some time over the summer reflecting on our previous budget format and how we had created the budget. And we had taken some exemplars from other districts and other communities and tried to replicate some of the other budget formats that we saw. And so we created this document. I will say in full disclosure, because it's something that we started new and from scratch, we did experience a few kinks along the way that we had to make some adjustments to some of our tables just to make sure we kept everything up to date. But what I do want to kind of do, if I can, is I have way more tabs than I'm going to speak about, because I think us giving the council the PDF version on the 10th and then the budgeted version on the 17th, you've probably had some time to go through it. So it's not important for me to speak to, every single page, but there were a few things I wanted to call out. So what I was going to do is just kind of walk through the binder. I'll call out the pages just to call out a few things, and then I'll be happy to take some questions at the end. So the first thing I wanted you to see is we made this sort of an annual report / budget. And so I wrote a letter to the community, which you've seen, and then we thought about all the things that we do in the school department that are important to the education of the students who live in Coventry, and align those things to our mission, to our vision, but also to give a full explanation of what all those things are. And the reason why I want to make sure the council has time to go through this and read it at their own leisure is that in previous years, when we've done our presentations for our budget and people ask very specific questions about how we invested the town's money in the educational system, there were questions were asked about, what's your vision? What do you celebrate in the community? What are the highlights of what you're doing? What is your story? And so what we thought, instead of waiting for the questions and then responding in a PowerPoint, we're just going to front load you with all that information. So there's information about accreditation and strategic planning and curriculum and everything. I do want to call out the curriculum page briefly, which is on page 12. There are three things I want you to all know is that a few years back, there was legislation that requires high quality curriculum materials in all the schools in Rhode Island. And there's a timeline that goes on that. And the timeline says that you have to roll out English and math first, then science, and eventually social studies. And English and math, or reading and math, have to be selected and implemented by June of 23, which is, this year. And then science is going to be after that. There's also a list of what is considered high quality. And so I want to spend a second on this because when we buy curriculum, it's not simply, like a catalog purchase where you peruse the best one that you can afford and buy it and send a box to a classroom and cross your fingers that everything's going to turn out okay. We had to come up with what our priorities were, what was important to us as a community, and then tried to select products that matched our priorities. But then we had to get the materials, train the staff. So there was a lot of professional development, and then begin an implementation process that was a rollout versus everybody doing it at one time, because we wouldn't be able to keep up with the demands. The reason I say this is that we've embedded in our budget the costs, not only for curriculum for next year, but we're hoping to build it into our budget. So year after year, we have it already built into our budget versus trying to find the money. Because what we've done in the past is use grant money and ESSER money to make some of those purchases. The grant money is gone, we spent it, and the ESSER money is about to be gone. So instead of us scrambling every year to find a way to purchase these materials and provide the professional development, we just built it into the budget, which is an increase, obviously. I am also going to have you look at the enrollment page on page 14, only because this comes up every single year. So I want to make sure you know where it is and what it looks like. I do want to take a quick explanation on the historical versus the projected. So NESDEC collects information from us every single year about our current enrollment, but also about construction that's happening in the community, permits that have been pulled, the kind of houses that are being built, multifamily, single family, number of bedrooms, all of those things. And they have a calculation process that they use to determine what your enrollment will be in the future, your projected enrollment. What we discovered is how we had been reporting enrollment over a number of years was different than how they pulled it this year. And so when we looked at our enrollment, it looked like a cliff. It literally looked like it was this and then dropped off. And I was very concerned about that because it looked like we lost hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids in 1 year. And we haven't, but we have lost students over time. And so what I had NESDEC do, and they went through Department of Ed to do this, is they went back 10 years and smoothed out the reduction so that instead of it showing a cliff and a drop in enrollment, they were able to make adjustments for the previous year submissions to accurately display and show you that it's been a slow decline. So if you look from 2012-13 to where we are now in 22-23, enrollment's gone down. And just so you know, since 1920, that's a nationwide thing. That's happening not just in Coventry or in Rhode Island, but across the whole country. There's reduction in enrollment in schools. I also wanted to show you that going forward, you see it based on NESDEC projections up through 23-33, the numbers being fairly smooth. Also on page 19, actually, if you don't mind, page 18, we also pulled the per pupil expenditure chart for 21. That was the most recent one I could find. So on this page, all of these lines represent all the different learning institutions in the state. And the yellow column, that first one, has the per pupil, and it's with and without tuition. But if you look at where Coventry is, it's highlighted in red. So of all of them, we were number 30, which is sort of the middle of the pack. But of all the public schools, and those are the ones I highlighted in gray, we're 11th lowest out of the 36 public schools. So the reason I point that out is it's definitely an investment to pay for students to go to school and to provide all the different services and things that they need. But I also want the people in the community to know that the school department does work hard to keep the per pupil expenditure as low as we possibly can. And I think that reflects that. Not going to spend a lot of time on the individual school descriptions because I think you probably had plenty of time there. But what we did do is have every principal write a description about their school. And then we had a demographic sheet that we created. So right now I'm looking at the one at the high school, which is on page 26. We captured on there enrollment figures, standardized test scores, demographics around different cohorts. We also have graduation rate, all the things that people would like to know about our school, you know, in a snapshot is there. And we did that for every single school. And then we followed that with budget pages that go through and basically show the council and the community how we're expending cash at the school level versus at the district level alone. So this is a school by school budget. I will show you page 78, just so as a point of reference. Let me give you a second to get there. On page 78, you'll see in the second in the second table, you'll see $160,000 next to curriculum development, $160,000. That kind of points back to what I had showed you earlier about how we're building in the cost for curriculum into the budget. So that line obviously is much higher than it had been in the past because we're budgeting for that. Out of district tuition is a big deal. It's a big expense for us. It falls into 3 different categories. I'm currently looking at page 80. So we have students who go to career and technical centers and other public schools. We have students who go to special education placements based on the needs identified in their IEP. And then we have students who go to charter schools. Every community has a similar budget, right? Everybody has people who are going out and some people coming in. I am on page 80. So what we did here, just so you could see specifically what's expended and where it's expended, we listed out the public schools that our students are attending, which we're spending, we're paying tuition. Then underneath that, which goes on to the second page, are the out-of-district placements for special education students. And then we have DCYF, and then below that are charter school. In some places, we've seen a reduction, and we've had less students going out of districts. In some places, we've seen it go up, and that's a big expense. For the special education out of district, one challenge we have there, and we experienced that challenge very specifically this year, is if a student moves into our district from another community with a very specific set of needs that requires an out-of-district placement, we just assume the tuition cost for that student. So if a student is attending, I'll pick one here. Let me see, Northern Rhode Island Collaborative, and Warwick is paying for that student. When that student moves to Coventry, Coventry then takes on that tuition. Now, we do have an IEP meeting, and we do sit down with the family just to make sure that that's still all appropriate. But more times than not, if they're in out-of-district placement, they're staying in the out-of-district placement. And all that does is means that the program that they require is not available in district. I will say, though, in the last few years, we've invested quite a bit in building out some in-district placements. And so we've had some cost avoidance in the last 3 or 4 years where students who would have been in out-of-district placements are now in placements in Coventry that we've built in a few of our schools to address really specific needs. You've seen our capital requests. I sent that over in January. And then on the last page 87, I just have that summary page that shows you the expenditure, revenue and expenditure breakout year over year by percentage and by dollar amount. And I'm going to save the rest of my time, I think, for questions. If I went too fast, I apologize. If you want me to go back, I will, but knowing you've had this for some time, I didn't want to be too redundant.
Thank you. Members of the council, questions, comments for Mr. Cowart? Councilor Ludwig.
Thank you, Superintendent Cowart. So I have a couple questions in multiple areas, so I'll just maybe just start with one or two areas we can kind of go through. The out of district numbers. So these are the numbers, it looks like since 2019, just to see kind of where the funds are headed. And I'm not surprised, like in the first chart on page 80, for example, to the Foster Gloucester, things like that. But when you broke it down to private sources, can you just give us an example here? So I'm not as familiar with some of these, like Bradley School, Groden Center. What is traditionally, I think of a private school as something that the state dollars wouldn't go towards.
Right. So these are settings that have very specific specialized programs. Could be for students who are medically fragile. So that program, so it's not a private school like Hendricken. It's a private institution, meaning it's not funded with public dollars, but we pay tuition because they have the staff to support the needs of the student that we don't have in the district. So sometimes it's medical, sometimes it's very specific behavior staffing. Sometimes it has to do with students who have social emotional needs that require them to be in a smaller, different setting than we can provide. And so, and in each one of these is different. For example, Groden Center and Pathways often are locations for students who are on the spectrum, who are low functioning and need a lot of support. Sargent has a lot of medical support and students with one-to-one or two-on-one needs.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Maybe I'll go to draft budget. This is page. It starts on 87. I always get mixed up around this time of year. For the amount of state aid coming in, are we at a point that number is finalized, projected? Where does that fit into
That
this?
number came from the governor's budget that he rolled out in January, and they created a state aid list from there. So that's the number we've plugged in, but I don't think that number is final until it's going through, the General Assembly, and because they're the ones that are going to determine ultimately what each department gets.
Okay, so okay, I'm gonna hold some questions and make a few notes. Thank you.
Yep. I will say though, this governor's budget invested quite a bit in education. And so we received more than we typically do under state aid. So we were pretty happy about that. So if that stays, that will make us, pretty happy.
I think I was more interested in the confidence level, but it sounds like we don't quite have that yet until the
Right.
June timeframe.
Yeah. And there's a lot of moving parts. So it's, it's not just a dollar amount, here you go. They look at the number of pupils we have. They've weighted some programs, so you get more based on certain populations, poverty, second language, things of that nature. There's also tied to that, poverty is determined by free and reduced lunch numbers, and they take a snapshot for free and reduced lunch in March. So we just uploaded into RIDE our most up-to-date information on our free and reduced numbers. That's going to drive a little bit of the budget in terms of what the state gives us, but also what the federal government gives us, because the federal government gives us title money, and Title I is specifically tied to poverty.
What's that? Councilman Pasqua.
I'm looking at the out of district tuition, and maybe I just need a little bit of clarification on this. So the Foster Gloucester School District tuition in 2022, your actual expenses to that district were 989,000. And 22, which all we have is the budgeted number, it's like 45% of that number.
Mhm.
And then, you know, we're increasing it 375,000 to 825. So can you give me a little background on how that works out and like, because it's a big variation. You must have some intelligence. to
Yeah,
think
I can speak a lot about how we got to the 825.
Okay,
So what we did is we looked at the current students enrolled at that particular school, but we do this for all the schools. And we look at what grade they're in, and we look at what grade level that school goes up to. So for example, if you don't mind me jumping around for a second, well, it's actually under a different category. In the charter school, not that I want you to jump into another section, but the Compass School, for example, goes up to like second grade. So when we look at current enrollment, if we have 5 kids and 4 of them in second grade, we know those 4 students are graduating out of that. So we can lower that tuition projection because we know of 1 more student that's still at that school. So we built it around that. Or if we already have been notified of a student who will be going there next year, then we count that in. So for Foster Gloucester or any of the publics, what we did is we looked at our current enrollment, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. 12th graders graduate out, so we subtract them off. We looked at what's staying in, which is 9, 10, 11, because next year they're going to be 10, 11, 12. And then we start getting applications for students who would be potentially going to those schools as early as the beginning of the year. And so we start taking account on what we have. And then for that particular school and even extra scratch a little bit, we do work in a little bit of a buffer because we know there's going to be a few that, I mean, I got one today. And so, you know, this is not, you know, a live budget that I'm updating every, you know, day. So we built in a little bit of buffer because we knew we would get a few more. If you don't mind me saying, I will say it's an interesting dilemma because not every career and technical center has the same programs. And so they have programs that we don't have. And so when a student applies for a program that we don't have, I sign the document for them to go there because the law allows them to go there. So they have performing arts. We don't have a pathway for performing arts. They have animal science. We don't have a pathway for animal science. So those get signed. But the other thing that happened this year that was frustrating is the General Assembly had passed a law that said if programs are considered substantially similar, then a student would stay in their home district. So let's just say, for example, we have a computer science program, which we do, and that Foster Gloucester had a computer science program, which they do. What that law should have done, the way we interpreted it here in the district and most of the other districts, is that we could say, no, you're not going to Foster Gloucester because we have that program here. And so when that General Assembly rule came through, we were kind of feeling we might make some headway on some of the people who are leaving for programs that we already have. Problem is, they made a list and it was very challenging for them to really identify very many programs that they really wanted to call substantially similar. So the bottom line is very few programs have been identified as substantially similar. So our computer science program was not listed as being substantially similar to the one at Foster Gloucester. Why? I don't know, because I wasn't part of that. All I know is that doesn't give us a whole lot of leverage in denying somebody the opportunity to go there. Our strategy has to be, and we've started it years ago, and we're going to keep working on it, is make our program better and desirable so people don't want to leave. And that's how you win this game. You know, trying to undercut somebody's ability to go to another school is, you know, it's a one-off here and there. If you make a program that's stellar, people are going to stay and go to it. And so we've put a lot of funding and support into advertising and promoting our programs, to making sure that when our kids go to Skills USA and win many, many awards, that we make sure people know about it, because our students perform in many cases as well, if not better, than almost all of these programs that they're going to. We perform better than Pontiac often. The other thing I'll tell you, and this is something that's also beyond our control, is that a student may ask to go to another school district to participate in a program we don't have, but sometimes there's other motivations. For example, the student may play D1 hockey and want to stay in D1 hockey, and Smithfield has D1 hockey. And so they'll ask for the opportunity to go to a CTE program there that we don't have. So we paid the tuition for them to go there, which is all fine. But the students also go in there because they want to be in Division I hockey and our team is Division, III. And so there is a sports thing that's going on as well, and everybody knows it.
Vice President LeBlanc.
Can you tell me what your total FTEs currently are? Because I know I know that you do have it kind of by school, but I just didn't know from a total perspective.
I have another page here and I think it might have that on. Harold, you guys can pull that up. You don't mind, I'll have them pull that up and then I can go to the next question. I will say ballpark, and we'll see if I'm right or wrong. We have about 700 and change between both units. So we have the teachers, which is 400 something. And then we have another 200 and change in the SRP. So it's right around I want to say 728. That's really specific, but that number seems to be stuck in my head. Those guys can look at it and let me know. Okay.
No worries. And then from a budget standpoint, did you budget any new positions, new teachers, new SRP?
So what we've done strategically is instead of building in new positions into this budget, we're going to try to offset positions with retirements. And so as retirements come in, and they've just started coming in, we haven't gotten them all, is we're going to try to fill the positions and vacancies we have with those retirements. That way it's a budget neutral hit to the budget.
Yep. Nope.
That makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And then I didn't know, and I don't know if you have any large expenses that you know off the top of your head, but I don't know if you could provide us with a list of budgeted items one time that are currently included in the budget that we might be able to utilize ARPA funds if the town council so wishes.
Yeah, so we've identified about, and it was a similar number to last year, about $50,000 worth of one-time expenses, which
Okay.
is not going to have a significant impact on the
No, it's
budget
not.
unless the council and the school committee is interested in purchasing things like curriculum. So we built the 160 into the budget to pay for those curriculum materials. We're budgeting for that. If the town council wants to use our funding for that kind of purchase, then that obviously would decrease that. There are other things in our budget that.
And
I
how
couldn't-
many, I'm sorry, how many years would those
That's
books
1
and
year.
records be good?
Well, so the textbooks are, depends on what we're purchasing, right? So there's two different categories. There's your textbooks. Then there's usually a technological component. That's a yearly, subscription. And then there's consumables, and those are things that get used once and then you have to buy them again and again and again. So that number 160 basically encapsulates all of that. There are fewer textbooks now than there were in the past because things move quicker and technology has allowed students to access information that, it's like an encyclopedia. You don't really need it.
Yep. Nope. Understood. Thank you very much. And then on page 87, it's essentially it's the school budget condensed version. I didn't know if it's possible for you to provide us, it doesn't have to be tonight, but actuals for FY 2023. And I don't know if there was a projection that maybe we could see like the full year. But
That's actually,
budget to budget makes sense to me, but I also like to see the actuals of where we're actually spending the money.
that's actually pretty good timing because we have at our next school committee that we're doing second quarter, I think, budget to actuals. And then the next meeting after that, we're going to, I think, have third quarter done.
Great.
So we'll be able to give you that information probably pretty
Would be
quickly
helpful.
because we're already working on it.
Appreciate it. Thanks for the answers. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Did you get that FTE? All right. I'm going to go on the record with 728.
Quite specific.
Yeah. We'll see how
I'm
someone.
gonna hold you to it.
All set.
Good.
Councilmember Shockley.
Looking at page 87, you have tuitions. So this 965, 224 is what you're assuming are people coming to Coventry from other districts?
Yes.
Okay. Is that a pretty hard number?
No, because if you look at it, it's basically been the same number we budgeted for the last 3 years,
Oh,
right? So that's projection based on what we have.
So it's
had
coming pretty,
as-
it's
It comes in right
close to
around
what we
there.
have. So I know just from personal knowledge that eighth graders, as of about a week ago, are supposed to solidify their classes. I know it's not a contract, it doesn't sign them into anything,
Mhm.
but how do your numbers look for people staying in district this year?
I don't know exactly yet. And, I really don't know until we start going through the applications to go someplace else and then who's been withdrawn and who's coming in. But I will say, we met with the high school last week and we put the whole schedule up and we go class by class, grade for grade, right? English 9, English 10. How many sections do we need? How many students are going to be enrolled in those classes? And that's based on what people have selected. And we're fairly neutral, meaning that we weren't able to cut lots of positions, but we also weren't having to add a lot of positions at the high school. We were pretty much neutral, which means based on that information, we're kind of going to be in the same place that we're at now. Matter of fact, if we look at the number of students graduating in 12th grade and the number of students in 8th grade coming up, the difference between those two cohorts is literally like 12 kids. They're pretty similar in size. But the groups behind that do get progressively smaller, which is reflected in that enrollment.
Gotcha. So just smaller class sizes in every year under the eighth grade right now.
Well, small class sizes are better for learning, right?
No, I'm sorry, I don't mean individual
Yeah.
classes. I mean the sixth grade.
Yes, correct.
So looking at page 88 and what had to be put aside for maintenance costs last year. Have you spent the 400,000 in ESSER funds and the other 878,000 in maintenance requirements? Is that
So-
money there? Is it?
So the answer is no, I haven't spent it yet, not because we don't have plenty of work to do. We were strategizing on what big project we were going to do and looking at where the money would be best spent. We're running short on time, I'm not gonna lie, but I will say, I think we've identified the project where that money is gonna end up going and it's gonna go fast. So that money will be spent before the end of the year.
Okay. And then this year, you're looking for about an extra $800,000 there?
Right, because it's a percentage of our operating budget,
Right.
which we didn't build into the budget, the maintenance requirement, in the past, we've gotten that from from the town council.
Thank you.
Any other questions, from members of the council? Vice President LeBlanc?
The contract, the teacher's contract is up this year. Have you included an increase of some sort in this budget related to that contract?
Yeah, so we definitely budgeted for raises, but we don't know exactly what those are
Right.
until we're all done. So we're at 2.5 something, depending on what that comes in as, we'll adjust and we'll have to make those adjustments, internally.
Just wanted to make sure it was in the budget. Thanks.
I do have a couple questions. So first, I just want to say, thank you for putting this together. I appreciate your comments before about saying we've heard you ask for this, for this, for this, and you listened and you provided that for us. And I do appreciate that. And it hasn't gone unnoticed with me. And I know that the town council can't tell you guys how to spend your money, but I think knowledge and communication helps with collaboration. So being able to ask our questions and better understand, I think is super helpful. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I'm glad that it's been a good investment of time, let me put it that way, because this
I
did not
agree.
come together overnight. We started working on this in November and went through lots and lots of revisions to get it to where it's at. And I know it's lengthy, I know that, but I guess I'm hopeful that when you do have your questions, you
Yes.
could go there and find them.
Yes, for sure. So I just had a few questions here. One throughout, can you just explain to me, I think it's labeled web-based soup instruct.
What page?
That's a hefty item in
Mhm.
all of the separate school budgets. So for
Okay, so yes, so here's what we've done this year.
page 28 is the first
Yeah,
mention.
but it's embedded in everybody's budget.
Yep.
So we have a technology department, and the technology department has always had the technology department budget. And what we've done, because the way UCOA is set up, UCOA requires us to associate dollars spent with schools and students. And so what we decided to do is take the money that's typically been sitting in technology as like a lump sum and allocate that throughout the buildings at each building based on their per pupil. So the high school has the most. So
Mhm.
all we did is reallocate money from the tech budget into the school budgets because now it's associated with the school and with the students. So when we report to UCOA, it's aligned.
So you just reassign the money. It's
Mhm.
not,
Yeah, I mean, there
Not-
might be some subtle increases here and there based on things like, this actually was just talked about at our last school committee meeting. We're
Oh.
purchasing some servers because we have some servers that are going down. We have some laptops that need to be replaced. There's always going to be hardware things that need to be done year after year. There is some software that's also in the budget because that goes to what I said earlier about curriculum and supporting curriculum. But the vast majority of those dollars that you see is a reallocation.
okay. I saw that, I think it's still in the high school budget. General supplies went up by about 20 grand and it was kind of flat or less than that for a while. I wasn't sure if there was some big investment you guys were making there.
Give me 1 second.
Page 30.
So general supplies, if you look at historically what's happened there, it was at 68, then down to 29, then up to 57, then down. It's a little bit of an EKG. It goes up and down. And we're constantly having to then backfill in those low years. And so what we wanted to do is budget appropriately from the get-go.
Mhm.
So what we did is we kind of looked at the secondary schools and the elementary schools in two different buckets, looked at the number of students, looked at what people were looking for in their supply lines, and came up with a standardized method of allocating funds to the schools. So actually one school asked for a significant more than this. They got cut down.
Okay,
And the high school, we bulked up a little bit because the school that asked for more almost never expends the full amount that they put there. This school is overspending because they're under budgeting. So what we
Yep.
did is to make the budget a little bit more true and accurate is we just standardized
Yeah.
the format.
okay. Um. Oh,
You have my number? I'm
wow.
not going to Foxwoods. Forget it.
Avoid the Price is Right.
Boy, how much is a can of beans? Okay.
Okay.
So we're going down to the
You think you could
728?
Pulling my record. I'd like to retract the statement of 728.
All right. In the middle school,
Yes.
talk to me about the therapists.
Okay. Yes. So there are certain services provided by folks such as they're vision teachers for people who are visually impaired. We have OTs, we have PTs. There are different types of therapists. Some of those positions live in our budget and we have them budgeted. Some of those positions we don't have and we're contracting for them. So we had a vision person in our budget and that person retired and we haven't been able to replace that person.
Okay.
And this has actually been something going on across the state that different municipalities, different school departments haven't been able to find vision people because there's not a lot of them.
Mhm.
So a lot of us are partnering with different contractors to get those services done. Same
Okay.
thing with, there's a lot of students struggling right now with therapeutic type needs. And so, having them meet with somebody a little bit more qualified to deal with some of the issues sometimes requires us to go outside the district.
Okay. Makes sense. And then I had called out the textbooks piece because I know you just mentioned with Vice President LeBlanc's question about less textbooks, but I noticed, I don't know if it's different for the line item in each school for textbooks. I saw that went up by a good chunk in each school.
Yeah, so we struggled with this. In UCOA, there was no way to call those other categories. The software is going to live in the other line. That's an easy one because that's technology. But the consumables and the textbooks all live in textbooks. Like there's not a line, there wasn't a way to separate those out.
Okay, so it's just,
It's
you're
an
labeling-
accounting thing with
accounting,
Bucoa
okay.
that we just had to put it in that line because
Okay.
there was no other line that came close to describing what the expense was.
Right. In BlackRock, 1 second, I'm getting there. Oh, I'm sorry. We'll do this one first. I noticed in Tyoke and Western Coventry, you subtracted out. It looks like you subtracted out some maintenance and repairs lines.
Yep.
Um,
You're looking at the HVAC at Western.
yes, and then
Mhm.
fixtures, general and
Mhm.
tech, sewage and cesspool.
Yeah.
Um,
So in the past, we budgeted for things that have been repaired and that expense no longer exists. So this is where going line by line through the budget is very helpful. So at one point, a certain dollar amount was spent on HVAC at Western. I'll
Mhm.
call it $20,000. And then that budget was, that $20,000 amount was budgeted to the next year as $20,000.
yeah,
And what we realized quickly is that money was never being expended. Why were they carrying a balance? And then we were able to drill back a number of years. And what we determined is that was specific to a project. And once that project was done, it didn't need to be in the budget anymore. So we
Mhm.
made
Okay.
reductions. Tioga is connected to the sewer now.
Yeah.
So we've made adjustments based on one-time expenses so that the budget more accurately represents what
sure.
is being spent.
In Washington Oak, other purchase professional education on page 57, that one went up considerably. Is that related to curriculum or, and it was just this school I noticed.
Which line is that?
57, 53, 220, professional and tech services, purchase professional education.
What's that? Yeah, so some of the program, remember I said earlier that we've created some programs in district,
Oh, yeah.
so we don't have to send students out of district. Sometimes we bring in staffing from other organizations to help staff our program because they have the certification or the experience to deal with that. And then every once in a while, we have students who will then go out. So that is specific to that
Okay.
line.
Okay, yeah, now that, what you said before answers my other question because I saw you considerably reduced Washington Oaks supplies
Right.
by almost 20K.
So in the end, we've actually saved a lot in
Okay.
supplies and materials. It may look like in some places went up, but at the end of the day, we actually reduced that.
In the department one, I assume you're just, I think I heard, we talked about this conversation that might be related last night with crossing guards. I noticed you're budgeting higher for bus assistants and monitors. I assume you can't get anybody, so you're trying to
Yes.
raise.
Right. So there's that. There's also certain buses are transporting small numbers of kids for specialized programs,
Mhm.
and they need to have monitors on those buses more than a typical bus. You know, when you go behind a big yellow bus, the monitor comes out, crosses the students, and then, checks underneath and comes back in. Some of our other buses, where we have 2 or 3 monitors on that bus because we have students with a variety of different needs.
Okay.
We also purchase vans. And so we have drivers because we're doing some creative transportation options to try to save some money with our statewide bill. So we have 1 van in and we're getting some more, but those vans will also need drivers and potentially monitors as well.
Okay. And same thing with transportation contractors. I'm sorry, that's in the facilities section.
Yeah.
That one went up by over $250,000.
That's our statewide, that's our Ocean State. That's our contract with Ocean State. So
Okay,
they're the ones who provide our buses. One of the things we did do with them, which was, it shows as an increase here, but it was actually a cost savings, is we were talking earlier about the number of students going to Pontiac. So Ocean State worked out a deal with us that they would provide the Pontiac bus for us versus us having to use statewide. which increased our Ocean State bill, but it decreased our statewide bill by 2 times as much. You know what I mean? We're getting Ocean State to do the same run for like $200,000, and statewide was costing us a significant more.
Okay.
I gotta tell you, it makes me very happy that you've all been in this budget and you have things like tabbed, because it makes me feel like all the work was worth it.
Yeah, no, went through this thing. On page 70, in capital equipment and property for tech, about 160K increase there. I don't know if you can provide some color on that. Technology related hardware, technology software.
Yes, this is one I was talking about earlier. Remember I said that we allocated some money to the different buildings based on individual expenses related to students and teaching. These are district-wide expenses, things like servers and for the Wi-Fi and for our local servers and for laptops.
Are these things investments that are easily movable for new buildings? Say we're looking to the future of the bond.
Yeah, so the hardware is typically easy.
Mhm.
It's the wiring that gets a little bit tricky, you know, the cost to run the wiring and then to take the wiring down and move it and rerun it again is probably not worth it. But the hardware can easily be moved from one
Okay.
place to another.
Let's see. I wanted to just double check, because we've been having, good communication leadership wise. And I think we had talked, just the number that you had mentioned for a percentage increase isn't matching with what I'm seeing in the back. So can you just confirm what currently your ask is for the projected percentage increase?
So I'd like to know what's not matching, but we have it at 3.39. That's on the summary page on 87.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep. I'm not looking at the right one. Yep. Okay. No, there was another number, but I might have screwed up. Sorry, that was a lot, but I'm
Okay.
trying to learn.
Yeah.
School committee, I don't know if Chairman, you want to take any comments or at this
Any-
time?
Thank you. Any comments or questions from members of the? Nope, I have none at this time.
All right. Yes, Councilor Ludwig.
So I have it's kind of a higher level question than what's physically in the book. So in the vision of the graduate,
Mhm.
This looks amazing for the future, building towards that graduate who is all of these things: reflective, critical thinking, global citizen, effective communicator. And I noticed, reading and writing and things like that are all built into each of these areas. The part that and this happens every year, the part that's hard is describing the need to residents who come and ask me, but what am I going to get for the increase?
Mhm.
So we've talked a lot about mandated services from the state, specialized things that we have to do. What about some things like, I think they're called STAR reports, some of the testing scores,
Yeah.
things like that. Like,
Right.
what's the overall messaging, I guess, to get us to a place where those increase so that it's almost like when does that happen? The increases in test scores and things
Yep.
like that.
Yeah, I mean, you're really talking about accountability, right? What's the accountability for this investment? You're going to invest in the schools. What's the accountability? So I do have a section on that on page 13, but I will say to you that we're experiencing a lull and now we're climbing back out of it, right? So the pandemic impacted everybody, even the Barringtons of the world experienced a lull, right? And now we're coming back out of it. But part of the investment that you're making in curriculum and in training is going to help that rebound significantly. And so I'll give you an example. So we rolled out curriculum in grades at the elementary level, 3 to 5 first, and then one K to 2. And the reason why we did 3 to 5 first is we wanted to do a few different things. We wanted to get them right into the curriculum so that when those 5th graders went to 6, and then eventually everybody moved up, that they were already into the new curriculum. But we also knew that the lift at K1 and 2 was going to be heavier because it was significantly different than what has been done in the past. Pedagogy wise, meaning how we teach, but also what the materials actually look like. And so in the grades 3 to 5, we purchased a math curriculum product called XIII. And XIII is what we're using across the board. And XIII has a few different components. It has an electronic, technological component where kids do things on their devices. That's why one-on-one is so important, even at the elementary levels, because it allows them to have access to their curriculum in XIII. But there's also a teaching and instructional and a practice and group work. And bottom line is almost immediately, we saw some struggle, but we also saw significant growth, especially in STAR, especially in grades 3, 4, and 5, the first year we rolled it out. And so now this year, we're coming back around. I don't have the STAR scores in front of me. Our math scores are better than our ELA scores. And a lot of that has to do with XIII, but also with the pedagogy and training and PD we've done around that. So the accountability is we're asking you to invest in curriculum and in training and in improving, a student's educational experience. The accountability is we should have kids performing better, right? They should do better. And that's one example. Another example, I got an email this week. So we have a substitute math teacher at the middle school who was a retired math teacher from the high school, meaning he's come back to help us at the middle school because we have a sub shortage. And he emailed me and he copied the math department chair and the principal on email. And he said, I'm subbing in this particular class. I gave this geometry test. I thought it would take the kids 30 minutes and I felt it was pretty challenging. Now, this is somebody who was a teacher in our district for like 30 years. Every one of the kids in the class finished the test in 20 minutes and every single kid got 100. Now, sure, there's some good teaching that happens there, but I think that's also a result because these kids are 6th graders of now multiple years of exposure to high quality curriculum. And so that's part of the investment. So we are tracking STAR scores, but the reality is that very first year of implementation is your toughest year. Everybody's learning the materials. Everybody's learning how to implement it. Everybody's trying to follow the timeline, what they call the scope and sequence of the curriculum. So right now we see 3, 4, and 5 performing on a pretty good upward scale. We see K1 and 2 struggling a little bit because they're being exposed to new materials. But the expectation is next year we would see them beginning to tick back up.
And is that across? Is the idea that will happen in all of those schools?
Right. So we purchased a new ELA product at the elementary school at the same time we purchased one at the middle school. So, and it's the same exact product, it's EL. So when the students from elementary, all 5 elementaries move into the middle school, they're moving into a product that is high quality, but also aligned to what they just came out of. What we used to have before is we had Journeys, which was not a high quality curriculum material, but the students had all different experiences inside of Journey. So when they got to the 6th grade, where we bring 5 schools together, the teachers had to sort of do a lot of differentiation to get everybody up to speed. This is going to be a little bit more seamless. And then when the curriculum, and Mrs. Anzalone is behind me, but with the curriculum work we're doing now between the middle school and the high school, we should see a seamless transition when they move up. We haven't seen, we're just in the beginning of it. So there's no false promises here. I'm not saying everything's stellar. What I'm saying is we see some places in our data where things are beginning to trend up. And that's ultimately what we want, right? We want a 5-star school at every school. We want high SAT scores. We want a graduation rate to stay high. We want our students to go. That's why the vision of the graduate is so important and aligned to our strategic plan. This is what we want for our kids. Like when they leave our district, they should be equipped to be good citizens, solid learners, and be able to have an opportunity to achieve whatever goals they have, whether they are ready for the work field because they've had a quality, career and technical program, or college, or the military, or whatever.
I think that part of the story in terms of where these kids head off to, wherever it is, I think that would also be helpful for me. I get a lot of questions on that in terms of okay, that, we have all these great things, like all these winnings in Skills USA. We have an amazing softball team, all these great things. I think it's on the academic side that I get more of
Yeah,
the questions.
Which is funny because we have kids that go to Brown. We had at one point 2 kids in the Air Force Academy. It's odd for any state to have more than, especially a state our size, to have 2 kids from the same high school in the Air Force Academy at the same time. The Air Force Academy is no joke. You have to not only have high academic rigor, but you also have to have letters of recommendation from your community to get in. And so that was 2 of our students were there. And that's just 2 examples off the top of my head, but our students do well. And it doesn't just mean just college, right? We have students, I just shared a video on our Facebook. We had a student who went through our graphics program, graduated the graphics program, and immediately started his own business in town. And he's been running that business now successfully for 10 years. And that's a result of the skills he learned here. We have kids who we at one point, we had 2 students in the automotive program that competed at the national level, and they were ranked 5th in the country. That's phenomenal. And so those are the kinds of things that we want to make sure people know about.
Yeah, definitely. Please keep sharing those with us. I am interested to see the progression. And we've talked the last couple of years about the impact from COVID on learning. I can see that in my own home. I know that's very real for, families across Coventry and Rhode Island. I would be interested in kind of seeing the progression there as the curriculum gets instituted. Just in the future, not any type of urgent need.
Yeah, we're even doing some work in mathematics, aligning Algebra 1 at the middle school with Algebra 1 at the high school. So it's the exact same class, the exact same experience. So kids who do Algebra 1 in 8th grade come into the high school ready for geometry, like truly ready for geometry, because those kids are going to go geometry, Algebra 2, and potentially trig and calculus. And those mathematics courses are kids that typically are looking for engineering or medicine or, really high science and mathematics careers. So we want kids to get an opportunity to get into that pipeline.
Thanks.
Any additional comments, questions from members of the council? All right, thanks. If your members have no additional comments, I'll invite you to adjourn your meeting.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn at 7:32 PM.
I make a motion to adjourn at 7:32 PM.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion passes. We're adjourned. Thank you.
We'll now take a brief 10-minute recess. I'll ask the town manager and solicitor to come back up to the dais and invite Taft and McSally and others to join us at the table.
I'm sorry.
Jonathan, how you doing today? Oh, yeah. You know, you want to say, go Jonathan, it's your birthday. We're gonna party like it's your birthday. We're gonna dance around like it's your birthday. Cause you know we're all so happy it's your birthday. You're looking good, Jonathan. How are you feeling? 38 years old. Are you excited? And you just can't hide it. No. Only one can know me, dropping some balloons, and I think he likes it. Yeah. We actually have a very special honorary Jedi robe. Where's my Jedi robe? Oh, no. You're having oh, please. You're gonna break my heart. I can't. I'm fixed lightsaber done. Here we go. A 1, a 2, a 1. Here we go. 1, a 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, oh, it's so sunshine, come on, I got this message for you. Well, we hope Jonathan's birthday is as great as can. Everybody. Now, come on, everybody, get over. Come on, real quick. Come on, Arlene, real quick. You're awesome. Yeah. 38. Oh, 38. 38. There we go. All right. There we go. One. There we go. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Ready? On 3, let's say, what's a Wookiee? 1, 2, 3. What's a Wookiee? We're gonna say, see you later, Darth Vader. And then we'll get on with me. Ready? 1, 2, 3. See you later, Darth Vader. Smile, everybody. All right. Happy birthday to you. Bye, everybody. Have a wonderful town meeting. We'll see y'all later. Thank you so much. It was such a relaxing. I got things outside.
We don't want you to feel lost.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna get started. The force is now with us on this bond council workshop with the council. Thank you. All right, so we're moving on to the next section of our agenda. Council members, you should have a couple of things on the dais in front of you. One is has draft written across it, timeline, Town of Coventry, Rhode Island, school bonds. That's from our solicitor's office. The other one says State of Rhode Island. I'm sorry, David Ferrara. And the other one, State of Rhode Island in General Assembly. This is a draft of the Bond Act, both from Bond Council. So at this point, I will turn it over to you guys. Just for the public, the gentleman we have here with us today from Taft and McSally are the town's bond counsel. Do we have Steve Masseroni today or no? Oh, I've never seen you in person. Sorry. Embarrassing. The force is not with me.
Somebody took his foot in his.
Yeah. So we have our bond counsel and our financial advisor here with us today. And this conversation is primarily to get really in the weeds on the prospective school construction bond. So now I'll turn it over to you. Nice to meet you. I have mine.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Ferrara from Taft and McSally. I'm the town's bond counsel. You have in front of you a prospective timeline, which is something that's been suggested of where we are. We're at number 2 on the timeline, which is a ways to go. This is the council work session on the Bond Act and the bond financing. There's already been a submission to RIDE, which you've seen from the architect's office. I've presented a draft of the Bond Act. This has been talked about. You've referenced it. You had a proposal authorizing the school committee to go ahead with a submission based on a school construction based on renovating 2 schools and creating a new elementary school. So the total, which I've incorporated into it, was shown as $80 million in bonds. There are additional items in the financing package that you showed were provided with, which has included PAYGO money, which is advance, school housing aid, and other incentives for a total of, I think it was $100 million. But anyway, these are what's in my wheelhouse, so to speak, is the issue is you're preparing a bond act for the council to ask the General Assembly to pass. So that's kind of where we are. And we're hoping that it could be done at maybe the next council meeting, but I wanted to give everyone plenty of time to see it. It's more or less in the standard form, but in this particular case, there's a couple of variations that the council needs to be aware of. We have with us the town's financial advisor, Stephen Masseroni at PFM, who's going to show you what probably matters most to you is how do you pay for the bonds and what the impact is on the town's budget and prospective interest rates and tax rates. So what this act does is it sets forth the terms under which you're going to ask the voters to approve the bonding. It'll be put forth at a referendum, which it seems to be the consensus to do it on October 3rd, rather than making a future decision about that. So you're asking the General Assembly to let you ask the voters to authorize bonds to be used for school purposes in the amount of $80 million on certain conditions. The biggest choice you have to make amongst everything is whether you're asking the voters to approve bonds on the condition that you qualify for 69% financing, which was what was circulated to the council previously, which you've referenced in your resolution, or some lower number, or any number at all. And I will say that as you'll see on the timeline, the 69% is based on a 20% bonus based on 5 separate bonuses for 5 separate things. That bonus ends if construction does not begin by December 30th of this year. So the latest RIDE has advised the schools, which have advised us that that's meant you have to enter into a construction contract by December 30th. You know, I think that might be tight, or it would lead you open to potential problems. Because if RIDE is suggesting, I understand that you go and do an RFP for the school construction before the bond is passed. That obviously involves certain costs. Also, everything in the bond act, every action is taken by the council. So if the voters pass it, then you will make contracts, then you will issue bonds, but each and every time it's within complete control of the council acting by majority vote. So by asking this to go forward in any format, you haven't made a decision to do anything. All you've made a decision to do is to go forward and ask the voters for approval. So if there was, so the reason Coventry's minimum guarantee for housing aid, which is always subject to General Assembly appropriation every year, is 49.2%. So we've discussed this with the financial advisor, and we think it's much sounder to proceed at that number, which is a number that will continue past December 30th. There is a proposal in the Senate that is being held for further consideration, which may mean it's incorporated in the state budget to extend December 30th to next June, which obviously is more convenient. So that's the first thing. That's not, and that's just like the amount of your bonds. That's not a number I'm going to supply to you. It's a decision you're going to have to make. Just like the decision, I presume, is October 3rd is a suitable date rather than if you were in the first district, maybe November's the suitable date because there's already going to be an election perhaps that day. With that, the timeline follows down. You would ask the General Assembly to pass it. RIDE would approve your $80 million of bonds for reimbursement, at approximately which time the General Assembly would presumably approve it, send it to the governor. This will presumably become law by the end of the session. And then you would proceed with the rest of the things on the agenda. But without going down endless detail on that, I've set it forth. And I assume that the biggest question you have beyond that is what is the financial impact on that process, or perhaps what I assume and the other questions would be about what are you using the bonds for? Again, that's going to be in your discretion, but the plan is to renovations for 2 or 3 schools and a large replacement new elementary school. I'll leave it to others to describe where you are in the construction or where you are in fitting all that into the budget of 80 million, or whether it can still be done for that amount. That's completely beyond my wheelhouse, so to speak. I'm just to get you the authority to do the bonds if you should decide to proceed after the voters approve. So with that, I'll first ask if you have any questions on the legal aspects of it. And then I'll defer to Mr. Massaroni to present the debt analysis and the projections.
Vice President LeBlanc.
Can you just tell me how, if we go over the amount that we are asking the General Assembly to allow us to bond, how that process would work? Because I recently read an article about Johnston. Their estimated construction costs were actually under by $50 million. And I can tell you what they're doing in Johnston. They're taking it out of their surplus. Coventry wouldn't be afforded that ability. So can you just tell me how that process would work?
Well, you'd be at a hard stop for the projects. You may not be able, you'd be able to proceed perhaps with the renovations and not the elementary school, but that comes at a definite cost of losing some, if not all, of the bonus of 20%. And you'd face a shortfall like Johnston did, like other cities and towns are rapidly. The estimates that based on the square footage, I don't know how that's going to be addressed. I think that's a growing problem and it keeps growing. And there are some the ride, I attached the ride per square footage, say for the elementary school, is roughly $500, and I'm told it's costs are coming in over that already. So I can't explain that part. I didn't set the 80 million. I do think to do all that you're saying you want to do, you're going to need more money than that. But I'm not a construction estimator. The prospect, other cities have been, it has been suggested, and maybe some have, of using premium on the bonds to do it, but that's way beyond what I believe the voters are approving by approving an $80 million projects. And I'm not going to, as bond counsel, I wouldn't approve the issuance of bonds for that as an end run to issue 100 million of bonds with 20 million of premium. I'm not going to do that. If you're very concerned about it, then there are two options for you. It is either to have more, have a larger number of bonds, downscale the project, or expressly tell the voters that it's going to go over that. And if we can get premium to use it, we'll use it. But I think that's explaining premium is a heavy lift to begin with.
Solicitor Angel.
Mr. Ferrari, you and I have talked a little bit about the premium concept. This bond act as drafted does not permit that. Is that correct?
The bond act here, let me see. I'm not aware of any bond act that specifically permits premium to be used.
But we specifically excluded.
This, I think generally it's a gray area. I would change the bond. What you have in front of you, I would make one more change to specifically preclude it if the council thought that 80 million was a hard stop. Again, some premiums are natural, so-called naturally occurring, and they're used for cost of issuance. So it might be 80,342,000, but that's not the kind of premium we're talking about to close the gap. Some cities and towns rely on premium, not in huge amounts, but significant amounts to cover capitalized interest. What's that? Well, when we issue, you probably don't issue 80 million of bonds on January 1st, because you will not spend that money right away. You might be interested getting what in essence is construction loan, 1 year bond anticipation notes, and keep rolling them over. If you don't pay the interest once a year, you will have to add that into the next bond. And that's something you might want to use for premium for. That's understandable, but it's not, again, that's showed in the debt analysis. So unless you can afford the interest for that 1 year in your budget every year, you're going to have to capitalize it, and it's going to have to come from somewhere, and it'll either reduce the 80 million or you'll get it, perhaps get it out of premium at the end. So that's another thing for the council to consider.
Thank you.
Council Ludwig.
Do we have a general date or anything on the vote and public hearing, or a target timeline for when we're going to bring that up? So for example, number 3 on page 2, our council vote and public hearing. Is there a target timeline for that? Is that going to be like in May, April?
If I may interject, I would think it would behoove you to do it sooner rather than later, if you're comfortable. It certainly before May 16th, certainly before it gets any closer to the end of the session. There is no hard stop in the General Assembly to accept city or town legislation, but the longer you wait, the things do have procedures there, and you know, it would certainly, March 28th is obviously the first date. Maybe there's some date in April that would be, the council would be more comfortable with when the time comes, but
Okay, so just as long as it's before the 16th.
Definitely sooner rather than later, though. He's right, because by submitting this, just because we submit it, say in beginning of April, that we're kind of getting in line to get the ability to go for both sides.
Okay.
So. Any other questions from members of the council? My question is, I was surprised to see you went with just the 80 in the bond act. I know that's what our resolution authorized, but I know there was some discrepancy notice between the amounts totaled between your office and the architects. Do you want to elaborate on that?
well, I thought that the construction budget based on the square footage didn't quite cover 80 million, didn't seem to cover it, but I'm not a construction estimator. I just did the math and I was short.
Okay.
So again,
How much are we talking though? Just because it would be uncomfortable for me to have us pass a bond act we know is not going to.
well, I think I have to leave them to explain what are they going to do? What are they going to do with if it's 1,000 square feet and things are coming in? I'm sorry, 1,000 students or whatever it is at a certain cost per square foot. I forget the calculation, but I was off. I thought it was off in the millions. So I don't know. And it's a moving target with the construction costs.
Mhm.
So I don't know what's, I would rather be more realistic at this point than, and rather than, just passing a bond act at 80 million and that you end up like in the same situation as Johnston.
But if we left it as is, then that just, I think like you said, it just means that's a hard stop then, and we have to adjust
You're gonna have to you'd have enough to do everything but the new elementary school. And then I don't know what you do about that.
yeah. Then you don't get the 69.
Definitely, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
If we didn't have enough to do the new elementary, are we looking at the 59 or the closer to the 49 for state aid, do you think?
That's a good question. I can't,
Okay.
I couldn't say. I know you're not newer and fewer.
No, yeah. Councilmember Shockley?
But I guess I just want to make sure we're asking the right questions to the right people in this room right now. Because I guess this is the first time this has been thrown my way, that it's our bond council who decides really what our bond, like we decided on an amount based on getting numbers. And then tonight's the first time I've had someone come forward and say, as the person who enacts this, I'm telling you how much the school is going to cost. I guess I'm just confused on if we should be asking Phil this question, if we should be asking Mario this question. I'm just a little thrown.
Solicitor Angel?
In more layman's terms, the cost to construction estimates have come from the Imagineers, the architects, and so forth. So that's what the bond act is drafted around at 80 million. What you're being told is legally, in terms of your borrowing capacity, you will be capped at 80 million. So if this project and those numbers that have been provided to you by the Imagineers are wrong, either as to per pupil cost or as to construction estimates, that the town side will be on the hook for anything over $80 million.
Yep, and that's understood. And then I'm wondering with other funds coming in for different projects that we're planning, we are still allowed to factor those in, right? Even though we're only going to go to bond for up to $80 million, we can factor in the other monies coming in for things like the gym floor, the auditorium.
Well, I think those monies have to go to those.
No, I know. I'm just saying we can still factor that in, right? Because really, from what we've talked about up until this point, it's closer to $100 million worth of projects we're planning on completing
Yes.
with 80 million worth of bonds.
Yes.
So his thinking the numbers aren't quite there at 80 million. We have some of that information in front of us already.
I think in conversations we had, Mr. Ferrara said that he had calculated that it was off by a couple million based on his math, and they were going to get together and reconcile, but I don't know if that happened. Councilman Pasco, I think you had your hand up next.
But a question on, for example, bond scenario 3, and as it pertains to interest rates. So I know typically with a loan, you secure your interest rate based on your credit worthiness, your rating, your personal rating at the time of the loan acquisition, and when you close it. But then interest rates, especially in this economy, are changing based on the Fed's movements and their assumptions of inflation and what they're trying to do. So all of that's it's moving. It's very malleable. It's a moving piece. So my question is, I'm looking at this here and it says it's January 2027 bond, interest rate 5%. I mean, what are you using for a projection to give you the idea that it would be 5%? What if it's 8.5%? Because that could completely change everything. Because at 5% at $80 million, we're looking at a 2% impact on our tax levy overall at our current levy.
Yeah, good question. And I don't know if you want me to take you through the presentation really quick.
Yeah.
Before I address that question, because I'll hit on that during the presentation.
This packet is from Steve's side. The bond act and schedules from David's side. So yeah, if you want to go through that, that'd be great.
Great, thank you. Good evening. As Dave mentioned, I'm Steve Massaroni from PFM Financial Advisors, and Dave is bond counsel, works with the legal aspects. I work with the financial aspects. I've been working with the town for probably close to 20 years. When they issue debt, I'm a municipal advisor, and I assist you in getting into the capital markets. I assist you with your bond rating and disclosure. And PFM, I work with about 22 cities and towns in Rhode Island, as well as some other communities across New England. So I have a brief presentation, which will touch on the cost of the project, your existing debt load, as well as some ratios and what happens to those ratios when you add this debt, as well as talk about interest rates a bit. So if you turn to page 3, existing debt, the existing debt profile for the town is actually very good. Your debt has a rapid decline over the next 15 or 16 years. You have 34 million outstanding currently, which is a very low level for a budget and a community of your size. You amortize about 70% of your debt over the next 10 years. One of the metrics that the rating agencies like to see is at least 50% amortized over the next 10 years. So your debt ratio is actually very good. If you turn to the next page, we ran 3 scenarios for this proposed new bond. And the only thing we changed is the base share ratio and the bonus points. So the first scenario is 49.2, and then we did 59.2, and we did 69.2. I'll just say, just following up on Dave's comment about in your authorizing resolution, your bond act, in addition to what Dave mentioned about going with the lowest rate, I would recommend that as well. Generally what happens is you won't know if you're going to get the bonus points until the project is substantially complete. You're going to issue the debt before you get substantially complete. So I've had communities that got caught in between because they had a floor which included bonus points, which you will not get until you're substantially complete. And, you know, Mario's here will send us a letter saying you're on track to get the bonus points, but bond counsel, until they see those bonus points, they're not going to be able to issue an opinion. So I would just recommend, you know, you can certainly in your literature to the voters, tell them that you expect to get between 49.2 and 69.2, but I would not put it in the act at anything lower than 49.2%. Before I talk
Or
about this,
anything higher, you mean?
anything higher, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
49.2%. I do want to just talk about bond premium a second here, because there's a little bit of a discussion on bond premium. So bond premium is market driven. I would not restrict in any resolution the ability to generate bond premium. If you're concerned that bond premium will be used for project, then simply downside the bonds that you issue with the offset of the premium. So for example, if you have a $20 million project and you're able to generate $1 million in premium, you only issue 19 million in bonds and the premium makes up the $1 million, and that's fully funds your project. So I don't know that you should restrict the use of premium, but if you did want to make sure that you're capped at 80 million, then the project should be reduced, but the bond should be reduced for any premium that you get. And I would say also have the caveat outside of cost of issuance, because you want to be able to pay the cost of the bond through the premium. I see you raising your hand.
Yeah, only because of a lack of understanding on
Sure.
my part. If we had planned to go to 80 million as our max, we're afraid there might be shortfalls, places in the project, and there does happen to be a bond premium, which is something I would never want to plan for, but just there happens to be one that could help finish the project. Would it cost the voters more money if we did that?
It would, yes, yeah. Because what happens, why premium is generated is because an investor who buys your bonds is saying, I don't want 4% interest. I want 5% interest because I'm elderly and I want to get 5% income for my retirement. But I'll give you 110% on the dollar because I'm going to get a higher interest rate over time. So yes, you are, because you're paying a higher interest
So
rate.
we'd pay more in interest.
Correct.
Okay, now
Yeah.
that makes sense to me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Which I think is why David made the point. It's kind of untruthful to plan for that because your voters, that's not what you're selling to the voters in the Bond Act.
And there's no guarantees. I mean, the market could change. Investors could want discount bonds, not premium bonds. And then, there's shortfalls. So again, my 2 cents would be that I wouldn't restrict bond premium because it could hurt the marketability of the bonds if you did. But if you are really concerned about going over the 80, then you would just put some condition that you have to reduce the bond by the amount of the premium. Again, carving out costs to issue the bonds. So with that said, scenario one, so how we structure this is through construction bond anticipation note. So bond anticipation note is a 1-year instrument. You'd issue for only what you're going to spend over that 12-month period. At the end of the 12 months, you issue another bond anticipation note for the additional proceeds that you need to continue the project. And we've modeled that for 3 years. So you roll over bands for 3 years before you bond the project. The main reason you do that is because of substantial completion. You won't get reimbursed on the bonds until on the project until the project's complete. So you want the bond payments to sync up with the substantial completion and the 69.2% state aid. So that's why you'll notice in the first 3 years, we have notes with interest and there's no offset of state aid. Once the bond's issued, you're eligible for the reimbursement and it syncs up. Now, there is legislation before the General Assembly was introduced that it would change that from substantial completion to when you issue the bonds. That's a big change, and that will help what you see on this slide number 4. So if the state does approve that, when you issue the bond, it would be eligible for reimbursement from day one, not 3 years down the road when the project's complete. So right now, while I have this modeled as notes over 3 years, if that legislation was passed, the plan of finance may change a bit, where you may issue bonds out of the box because you're going to get reimbursement. It would only improve what you see on the slide. So then once the bond is issued, we assumed a 5% interest rate. So historical rates are for 25-year debt for an A1 community is probably about 4% right now. We saw rates, as you all know, in 2% for tax exempt debt about a year and a half ago when we bottomed out in the market. We had a nice run for about 10 or 15 years where 20-year bonds were under 4%. But historically for an A1 credit, a 25-year bond, because the longer you go out on the curve, the higher the interest rate, The historical average is about 4%. So we model at plus to that, 100 basis points of cushion. Right now, if you issued the bond today, probably be above 435 for 25-year bonds, slightly above the historical average. So there is some cushion in there that if rates do go up a bit, there's some cushion in the numbers. You want to balance it. You want to be realistic, but you want to have some cushion. You don't want to scare folks away that, if I ran it at 8%, it's not affordable, quite honestly. One thing you have to also factor into this is that I'm a state taxpayer, and the state's picking up 70% of that increase in rate. You're only picking up 30% at the 69.2. So there's not a lot of interest rate risk at the town level for the bond. There's more obviously on the state. It's a good estimate, 5%. I think it's got enough cushion to give folks some comfort that hopefully won't be higher than that. End of the day, the big number is on the far right column. If you get 49.2%, once the bonds are issued, the annual cost is about $3.2 million. And we'll talk about the tax rate impact on a couple slides after that. Turning to the next slide, again, same scenario, just added 10% to the reimbursement rate. And you can see that the annual cost went down to 2.7 million at 59.2%. Same assumptions. And slide 6 has 69.2, which I know is what folks are expecting or hoping for, and it brings the cost down to 2.2 million. So that would be the cost on an annual basis. As you know, once it's in the base as far as debt service, and we'll talk about tax rate impact in a second. Just turning to page 8 quickly here. So you can see we looked at where your debt profile would be in fiscal 26, assuming the bonds would be issued in fiscal 27. And your ratios in good shape. Really the key ones to look at are the bottom of that column. Debt as a percent of estimated full value, 0.81%. That's low. Your debt burden's low. Anything under 2% is good. Anything from 2 to 4% is moderate. Anything above 4% is on the high side. Debt service as a percent of operating budget, 3.06%. Again, on the low side. Anywhere when you get closer to 8 to 10%, it's concern. Anywhere in the 5-6% is moderate debt burden. So your ratios are really good right now. We pro forma it out 27 using the share ratio of 49.2, 59.2, and 69.2. And I'll just use the sort of the more conservative 49.2. Your ratio is 3.2% as a percent of full value. It's moderate. If you factor in the 70% state aid, that ratio actually goes down to a 145, which is below that 2% that I just mentioned. So clearly state aid makes this, provides more capacity for debt when the state's picking up 70% of the cost. The debt service as a percent of the operating budget, 5.89%, again, a moderate number. So, adding this 80 million, you have capacity for it. That's what I can tell you as far as from a credit standpoint, you have capacity for it. We also tested out a little bit to see, there's going to be other needs in the town. Can you pave the roads? Can you fix buildings?
That's the question, the multi-million dollar question.
So
Because we were told in the past, I think that we had 95 or 96 million in bond debt capacity. Is that a true figure, or where do you place our actual?
Yeah, so if you issue 80 million, so we ran some numbers, you can issue non-school debt, no reimbursement, comfortably 15 to 20 million. So for example, 15 million brings the percent of estimated full value to 3.75%. Again, that'll blend down a little bit because some of this is school. So again, still under that 4%. Debt service as a percent of operating budget goes to 7.18%. So that's why you're pushing it at probably 15, 17. I would say the highest probably would be 20 million of additional debt capacity for town projects until you start amortizing some of this down. So as you start amortizing, you'll have more capacity. But, the question is, will this impact my rating? 80 million with 69% or even 49% State aid, it won't move the needle, I don't believe, on the rating. I mean, I'm not the rating folks, but just based on, what we've run. And could you add another 15 to 20 million? Perhaps I think you could with no impact on the rating. And let me just talk on the rating just for a second. So, the credit rating agencies use a scorecard methodology, which we have access to. And, Moody's, the good thing is Moody's just changed their methodology back in November. Some communities were downgraded, some were upgraded. Coventry came out fine. You were not impacted by the methodology change of this past November. But this scorecard, the interesting thing that I always think is kind of crazy is that debt is only 10% of your credit rating. So you're an A1 with Moody's, debt only makes up 10% of that score, 10% is pension. Then you have tax base 30%, finances 30%, fund balance is key to that. So, and demographics. So it's interesting that, the debt portion is only 10% of your actual score. So with that said, just the last page, tax rate impact, we took another conservative approach on this page 9. We only use 3.1 billion of base, which is just residential, commercial, doesn't include tangible, doesn't include motor vehicle phase out, doesn't include frozen taxes, just 3.1 billion. At 3.1 billion, the worst case 49.2, you can see the cost per $300,000 home, $359, it goes down to 300 for 59.2, and then 245 for 69.2. So that's, the cost per home, per average home. So with that, happy to answer questions.
Solicitor Angel.
Thank you, Mr. Massaroni. I just had a question on the underlying assumption, if you will. The properties that were assessed, we're talking real estate, on the residential, is that 100% of the residential tax base, or is there an assumption baked in for exceptions that are made for folks who, may have their, they may be homestead, they may be, a disability waiver, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a net number. So it's net assessed value is the 3.1 billion. Net of any abatements or exemptions. So worst case is how I would view that as far as the costs. I mean, if that 3.1 billion is a little bit higher, obviously the cost is going to go down per homeowner.
Vice President LeBlanc.
Mr. Massaroni, thank you for your presentation. For anybody listening, I'm a little concerned because one of the slides, slide number 3, it says outstanding debt, and it has it at 34.3 million. But if you look at the June 30th, 2021 financial statements, and you go to one specific line item called long-term liabilities due in more than 1 year, there's $239,465,471 in that line. So it sounded like we don't have a lot of debt, but you're talking about paper debt. We also have pension debt that you haven't even touched upon. And we have our police pension is like one of the least funded pension plans in the state. So $80 million might not sound like a lot of money, but it could fix a lot of our current problems that we have without spending it on something else. So for anybody listening, I didn't want them to think that we only had $34 million of debt, because that's not an accurate reflection, at least in my opinion, when I look at the financial statements.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I'm glad you raised that, actually. So when we talk about 10%, the Moody's score for its long-term debt, it's bonded debt. Another 10% of the score is pension obligations and OPEB. So it is factored into your scorecard that, yeah, you have more than 34 million of long-term liabilities, I would call it. You have pensions, and your pensions are, below average as far as the funded level. And that is all factored into the rating of A1. Quite honestly, the median rating for communities across the country is a AA3. Coventry's an A1, and the reason why you're an A1 for the most part is because of those long-term liabilities and the status of those two pension funds.
Agreed.
And if I could, Councilman, just one other point: 34 million is just tax-supported debt, doesn't include sewer debt. Those are paid by user fees, but it factors into the analysis. And I should be clear as well. this scorecard and the fact that I made the comment about not moving the needle on the rating because of the debt, that assumes everything stays the same or improves. It assumes that you're still going to have a nice balance sheet with, I should say, cash position and reserves. It assumes that you're going to continue to fund 100% of your pension obligations. It's going to assume that you're going to at least have steady growth or, even flat growth, but not negative growth. It's going to assume that your demographic profile doesn't change. So there's a lot of factors in there. This is just based on financial statements that you have issued for 2021, and then you layer on the debt, that's what happens. But if you deplete your reserves to 5%, and then you add 80 million of debt, yeah, certainly that could have an impact on your bond rating.
And you just mentioned a nice looking balance sheet. Coventry's balance sheet is not nice.
No, I meant,
We have a net position of negative $114 million.
No, I apologize. I meant to say your cash position and your reserves, you have over 10% of unassigned fund balance, which is actually a good number for an A1 credit.
We are looking into that number currently. And then one other thing that you had mentioned, you're saying that the state is taking a lot of the responsibility of the interest rate if it goes up, the risk. Going back to Johnston, because they went over, a piece of that was $20 million related to the increase in the interest rate. And the taxpayers, not the state, are going to have to eat that because they're going to take it out of their surplus. So, I mean, I know we don't want to go over that $80 million, but I'm very concerned about that possibly happening. And then the state, if we don't bond it, the state's not taking on anymore. And then our taxpayers are going to have to eat that. And that's one of my biggest concerns.
Yeah, full disclosure, I represent Johnston, and some of that information is not correct, to be honest. That was
Just what I read in the paper.
Yeah. Johnston, for example, issued 85 million at 4.6%. We were modeling it like a 4.43%. I think some of those comments were based on, what they could have issued maybe 2 years ago, but the rates were actually what was expected. Project costs have gone up, but that's not for here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Shockley.
Thank you. So if we put this to the residents with the idea that $360 is the impact on your average household that pays a regular tax bill, and then we do get the full 69.2 or even the 59.2, somewhere in the middle, would we be able to reduce taxes or make some sort of change at that point? Because it seems like we would have been getting reimbursed from the taxpayers for the lesser reimbursement for at least some period of time.
Yeah, good question. So if that law passes. So if the law doesn't pass, it's going to be ratcheted up over time. So you're not going to be taxing them until you issue the bonds for the full amount. So you'll
Right.
be able to adjust before you issue the bond. So if you notice, we issued the bond anticipation note. So if you look at even scenario one, it's 420,000 on the far right column. So that would be the first year's impact. Second year is 1.6 and then 2 million. When you bond, you're going to know your fixed cost before you actually send out that next tax bill, if you will. So if it's lower, you don't have to, tax as much. So you'll have an opportunity to not have to go for the full 345.
So this doesn't become part of based on this scenario, doing the bands in this way, this doesn't become part of the new tax, I guess you'd say, until 2028?
Yeah, so it's cumulative. So in year one, whatever the cost to add 420,000 in debt service to the base.
Oh, okay. I thought you just said we don't start until.
Yeah, so year one
fully-
would be 420. So I'm going to make the numbers up. Say it's 25 cents. Year two, you're going to add another 1.2 million. So maybe that's another 60 cents. And then year three, another 400,000 and so on. So when you're ready to bond,
We've ratcheted it up.
You're going to ratchet it up, but you may not have to ratchet it up as high as you originally thought because of the fact you're going to get more aid.
All right. I got you. All right. Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Mr. Massaroni or Mr. Ferrara? I don't know if at this time, Mr. Conte from Studio Jade wanted to come up, or Mr. Carreño from Ride.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here this evening. I want to quickly clarify one thing. On a number of presentations, I have been presenting this slide that had an expenditure and revenue. And the expenditures for our RIDE application is $100 million. Of that $100 million, the new school, based on the RIDE School Building Authority formula, is about 82.2 million. That should not be confused with the $80 million bond. That $80 million bond is part of the $100 million revenue source. So I just want to make sure there was some reference to discrepancies. Maybe that's where that was coming from. But we are estimating, based on the formula, a new school of about 82.2 million. Now, we have seen recently that the RIDE formula sometimes does not cover that. So what are our options? Our options are, at the very beginning, when we're programming the school, to manage the square footage and the program to the budget. What that means, for example, let's say we need to cut a couple thousand square feet out of the school. So we would work with the school department and say, you know, maybe we don't need 2 art rooms. We're going to use 1 art room, and we're going to use a makerspace as another art room. Maybe we don't need 2 music rooms. We have 1 music room, and we'll use the stage as the second music room. Maybe OT, PT, and maybe some school resources are shared in a particular space. Maybe the classrooms are all just a little bit smaller because of the furniture we're using is more flexible. Maybe the corridors are not ultra wide with collaboration space, but rather there are enrichment rooms that are connected between the classrooms, and we can make the corridors the appropriate size. So there is a back and forth discussion early in the design process so that we can maximize the budget and build the appropriate school. I've read recent articles where non-school construction is declining and costs is declining. A number of the large CMs are estimating a 7% reduction in, as opposed to escalation over the next several years. So I believe you have to trust the process in managing the new school to the budget. So I want to make sure I made those comments.
Yeah, I think, I do think we have a right to be alarmed, though, reading some of these articles, because it sounds like we're coming right up on that. And that's my biggest thing is I want to get the biggest bang for the buck, but I also, I want to make sure we have enough of a safety net as well. And that we're being truthful to the taxpayers and what we ask of them to approve.
I agree. That's the only comment I have. I'm happy to answer any other questions, or Director Carreño can come up.
Members of the council, any questions for Councilor Ludwig?
So it sounds like you're maybe going to collaborate offline, but it sounded like there were some questions around some of the construction costs that you had mentioned earlier. Who did you pointed this way, and there's a lot of people over there, so I don't know who you were talking about collaborating with offline on the construction costs.
There are ride reimbursements and there's square footage required for elementary schools. And when you multiply it out on the square footage, the ride reimbursement, the construction costs, I just want to see how that, fit in.
So are you?
And these have been the construction, I think, this concern about the costs are at different levels than, has been programmed in the past. And I just would prefer that you, given that we have to put this into a construction contract before the end of the year, it, and there's not a lot of maneuverability around those dates presently. I just want you to, the council to be aware that what are you going to do when, and
If that happens.
if that happens.
So, that's the part I
want
would.
to see blinders on and say.
Yes, of course. No problem. So I guess what I was concerned about is that sounded like the new development you were talking about. Is that what you were mentioning?
That it's not a new development.
Oh, it's not a new development.
That we'd been given a $100 million project from the beginning and the different funding methods. So I wasn't surprised that the project was more than $80 million. Didn't recall that 82.2 was the exact amount for that. school, But
I don't think the math discrepancy is on the total project. The discrepancy is on the cost for the new elementary school.
right, I didn't recall that it was 82.2 in
That's what it was
in the breakdown.
presentation.
I
Yeah.
didn't recall that, but it does sound like it's probably something that they should discuss. If it is if it is those couple $1 million, it's not a discrepancy. It's
So,
what you assumed. It's
so,
just less than the bond.
yeah, I am unclear on any coordination that would be necessary. Typically, the architect is not coordinating with bond counsel. We created a stage 2 application worth $100 million that has the Coventry Elementary School at 82.2 million based off of a formula. The School Building Authority is currently reviewing that application. It's reviewing the 82.2 for the elementary school, the 8 for the high school, the 3.7 for Western, the 2.5 for Washington Oak, and the 3.4. I have nothing to add to this. We have estimates from a third party that have accompanied this application. We will respond to the School Building Authority. They may challenge those estimates. I have worked in other municipalities where they have funded less. They've said that they will reimburse less than what was asked. So that's the area that we're in right now.
So my question is, who are you talking about collaborating with? You had pointed this way. I don't know who you were pointing at.
All right. So
Who's going to get the answer for us, for example?
Mr. Ferrara did the math himself on the elementary school, the new one. His number came to 89 million. Studio Jade's number is coming to 82 million. $7 million is not chump change. I'd like to know which one's the right number as we continue to go forward. That's
So-
what I'm talking about.
Okay, so we also had a third party estimate that is part of this. That third party estimate came in higher than 82.2 million. And that's fine. That's their estimate. We're only going to be eligible for reimbursement up to 82.2. So the challenge is during the project is to maximize the square footage for $82.2 million. We don't have to redesign everything to get it to the number when we have our third party estimate. That's the whole idea, so that RIDE is aware of what that project value is at that particular time. But we can only put in our formula that we are eligible for, which is 82.2.
So I don't know who's checking with who. I still don't have an answer here, but the fact that there's such a large discrepancy, that does concern me now as well. So I have to be honest, I don't know about the Johnston item. I haven't looked at that recently, so I'll take a look offline. But it sounds as though, in summary, a bond amount was approved and it actually turned out to be 50 million more. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and then they're using their surplus to pay the overages, supposedly,
Okay.
per the report that Mr. Mascheroni said, not 100% accurate, but just for clarification purposes.
Just for summary purposes. Okay. So that would be my concern then, that number is.
That's what I'm saying.
possibly so much higher.
I just would like that to be quashed. I'd like to know what the real story is there. And I want to know what's a conservative contingency to have, not just one that we can cram into what we can afford. What kind of contingency for this project would make sense given the current climate? So those are my two things.
That sounds totally appropriate and appreciated. I know we've used this term, we have to trust each other in the past. I'm just gonna be honest, I can't trust on a $7 million differential.
Yeah.
So I need to feel better about that number. Thanks.
Well, I know that you're not beholden to anybody but it would be nice if our bond counsel and our architect were singing the same sheet of music. That's all.
Sure, and I mean, I can certainly do that and will do that. It's true that we have a cost estimate that's higher than what the RIDE formula is. I don't know, we're unable to change either one of them at this time, right? The formula is what the formula is, and the estimate is what it was provided. That's where we're at. There's not like you can pick a number in between. Remember, our application is for $100 million. So although I'm not advocating this, you have some flexibility, right? Whether you would want to, and you may not, take from one project and move it to the new school. That's an option. You may not want to do that. But we're looking for $100 million approval from RIDE that is eligible for reimbursement. And then the revenue part for that 100 million, 80 million of that is bond. So unless there's anything else, I probably think I need a little direction in that I have an estimate, I have a RIDE stage 2 application and a formula. I can certainly talk to bond counsel, but both of us will agree that the number is somewhere between the formula and the estimate. My answer.
So you're saying that David's estimate of 89 is the formula and
Oh, well, I don't know where,
is the
I don't know where
estimate.
David's 89 came from. I would probably just refer to the estimate that we have in our stage 2.
I just want to, I'd rather be conservative than have a Johnston. I think we should have we should learn from this.
Mhm.
That's all. I'd rather, I'm feeling like we're cramming this foot into a shoe that's snug, and I'd rather feel comfortable. So,
I have some questions. Some
Councilmember Shockley just had her hand up
Yeah,
first.
I think overall, we just want to make sure that when this is done, we've built a quality school that can house the number of children we need to house. So we don't want to finish with a school that doesn't meet the need. And it sounds like there's an estimate of 89. We have to figure out how to create what we need within 82, because that's what RIDE is going to help us reimburse. Like that's the highest that school can cost based on what they're willing to reimburse per square foot or what have you. We just need to make sure that we can pay for it with the 82. I guess that's where I thought we were is I don't want to cut corners from the 82 and suddenly have it be that we're not housing enough children or we're not using the right quality materials, or like in 10 years, I want people to be like, that school they built in Coventry, they did an amazing job. They were efficient. They are meeting the needs of the town. So I think that's what everyone's hoping for in the end. And it doesn't become, let's talk about Johnston again. Beautiful rec center. They didn't do the parking lot and it's a mess. So you get to their beautiful rec center and the first thing you see is their mess of a parking lot. So sorry, Johnston, I have nothing against you, but I do want to make sure that we don't have an unfinished product.
Solicitor Angel.
So, Mr. Conti, I did some math myself. And when you look at the school building authority website for the Rhode Island Department of Education, in December of 2022, they have a school cost analysis for an elementary school per square foot at $529 a square foot.
Mm-hmm.
And when I add up the square footage in this elementary school project, there's 170,000 square feet times 529 equals $89,930,000 exclusive of furniture, fixtures and equipment. And, you know, that's my round math. So I'm wondering,
So the square footage is a resultant of the enrollment. First. So RIDE guidelines say for an elementary school of this enrollment, it's this many square feet per student. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think we were looking at a building that's like 140 to 150,000 square feet based on the enrollment. And then once you,
I took the 900 students estimate from your presentation. And it's a 900 student elementary school is
Okay.
what I think was projected. I took that from your presentation. So that's where I came up with that. That's where this math comes from. And I know that that's where Mr. Ferrara's math comes from. So I guess.
so there's just one piece missing and that we should check is a 900 student elementary school is how many students per square foot. Then that would give us the building square footage. Then you take that building square footage and multiply that by the 529. So that's probably something I can certainly check and work with Mr. Angel and Mr. Ferrer on to make sure we're both in alignment.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem.
Vice President LeBlanc.
Just a point of clarification for anybody listening. It was in the Warwick Beacon. The title of the article was, hang on, I'm just, for anybody listening, soaring costs haunt Johnson's new school plans. Estimated expenses overshoot bond by $50 million. And there's an actual breakdown, 10.2 million cost overruns for the new elementary school. The early childhood center, 7.2 million. The high school was 11.4. That's all the cost overruns. So that was 28.9 million. And then they said $20 million due to interest rates rising. That's how you get to the 50 million bucks. So just wanted to clarify.
So again, I guess what I would like to do is before, this is me personally, before I bring this bond act in front of the council to be passed, I want to make sure that 80 is still a number that gets us there. And because I would imagine the 7 million would make a difference. And if 80 million was the amount we're supposed to go with.
Thank you. So I will do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'd like to get this before the council drop dead April 11th as a meeting. So would that work for you guys?
Totally.
Okay.
Totally.
I don't anticipate us getting completely buttoned up before March 28th, which is our next meeting. So I think April 11th is fair, but let me know otherwise. Mr. Cranio, did you want to? Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for having me. I actually want to start off with Johnson because I think there's a lot of good things and lessons learned there. The first piece, and I think and a lot of the questions you asked earlier can actually be answered as Johnson as an example. So the first one with the elementary school, I think Steve mentioned they 4.63% reimbursement, but they took premium on top of their bond because that helped solve the first challenge with the elementary school. There's a variety of strategies for rising costs. One of them is premium. Premium can be used to reduce bonds, but can also be used to offset rising costs. So Johnston ratcheted up the reimbursement rate slightly, which is reimbursed at 58.7%. So it's lower than Coventry, but they use that amount to cover the cost overruns at the elementary school. So that project is off and running. Other pieces, the majority of their big project is a new high school. The square foot costs for high school are much higher than elementary school. So, that's just one thing to be mindful of. And again, you receive or could receive up to 70% reimbursement. at an $80 million bond. They're doing $215 million at a lower reimbursement rate. So that interest liability is bigger for them than for Coventry. Just something to keep in mind. One of the and this is not unique to Johnston as well or as others. This is a true thing that the costs keep rising. What many communities will do will like reprioritize. So in this case, if something happened, if I were you, I would delay the projects at Western, or like the small projects, and I would do the one big project that gets you all the bonuses.
Yes.
You can always come back in time and do renovations. The other piece, and this is a strategy that Central Falls and others are doing, and Cranston as well, is you have your core building expenditures, and then you have things that can be done after the fact: parking, site work, playgrounds. Those can be done with, if you I don't know what the status of your revolving fund is, but if you sell the properties, you can come back and do those without issuing debt. That's another strategy others are doing. The other piece that hasn't been mentioned is you'll receive about $8.4 million in PAYGO on top of your 80 million. So even if, and I don't know the 82, 89 that's been referenced here today, but you have 80 plus another 8 at least. So you have at least 88 million of cash for whatever the project ends up costing. We're in the process of reviewing your stage 2 now. I believe you'll receive comments, I think, by the 24th, and then you have a few weeks to respond. Through this process, that'll help us evaluate what that final number may be. If you use the formula, it may say 82, 83, but you can also make a case if you have site remediation, if you have excess special education, if there's other things there that can move that up or down. Again, we'll know the number based on what you provide to us. That's something that should be considered, and we'll know that number in the next few months. What else was covered today? Yeah, and I think the final piece is just one thought. Again, this is just the 89 that was calculated. If you're using the straight formula from our guidance document, that's the maximum number, and I believe the district is working with a more efficient footprint that could explain the $7 million delta. So if our regulations allow 140 square feet per student, and I believe you're designing at 120 or 115, that would explain that difference. So our regulations list the max that we would reimburse you at.
Yeah.
So my question is, based on historical data, I know that this is a max, but what is the historical data telling you on construction cost? I assume that RIDE tracks that.
We do. We have a third party who helps us with these numbers. And again, so we have our base number. When you factor in FF&E and other costs, it can actually get into the 600s and higher. Part of it's what you produce to us to review. So if you don't have any extensive site remediation, then you won't get that. If you don't have a high special ed pipe, you won't get that. Like this, it's a case by case, but that's the standard guidance that we provide to everyone. And at least so far today, even with these rising conditions, the major projects are all getting done. And we work with districts. If like we're working with Johnston on finding a way to make sure that their 2 biggest priorities, the elementary school and the new high school, get done. They're going to defer their middle school because the middle school is mostly renovations that can be done after the fact in a piecemeal basis. So we would do the same approach here. If once you're approved, if let's say for some reason this thing comes in at 86 million, well, you have 88 in cash when you include your PAYGO, then maybe some of the work at Western and somewhere else gets deferred and you do it later, or you fund it out of a revolving fund. But we will work with you just like we work with every other district to make sure this project could be successful. Yes, ma'am.
When will we know if we get the additional PAYGO?
Yes. So the other piece, and when we're working with Steve, that's not included in there, the equity adjustment, because I think at one of the building committee meetings, the thought was, let's be conservative if that doesn't come to fruition. So there's another $8 million that we're recommending to the council that gets added at the time of approval. We're confident that it will go through, but it's not based on that. So those additional resources would make that information even better.
And we'll know that on the 24th when we get the results back.
May 16th is when you'll know, like it's the back-to-back action items.
Okay.
So you would know, and we're grouping Coventry with 3 other districts. So either they're going to say yes to all of you or no to all of you.
Any other questions for Mr. Carreño? Thank you. Really
you.
appreciate you coming.
Excellent.
So if anyone who's presented tonight doesn't have anything else to add, So just next steps to recap. Sounds like it works for you, but I'd like to plan to get the bond act in front of the council at our April 11th meeting. And I want to confirm, obviously, that the 80 million amount is enough and is the correct amount, most accurate, based on that. Yep.
Mr. Ferrari, it's probably feasible for us to get back before this group in some fashion based on feedback on the 24th and our conversation with Mr. Conti to get back to them with some feedback in reconciling some of this math after the 24th, but before the 11th, I would assume.
Yes, totally. Whatever.
Does that work, Mr. Massaroni, as well?
Again, I don't dictate the cost. I've just seen the impact elsewhere.
No,
And whatever you want to do with this amount of bonds, and if that means projects gets deferred, it's totally fine.
No, I'm just talking bandwidth to have the information.
Yep. So that we can crunch the numbers a little bit more and get some closure on the gap, if any. Okay.
Yeah.
No.
Toxic words. No.
No.
All right. With that, I'll move on to public comment for undocketed items. Anyone in council chambers, public comment on undocketed items? Going to Zoom. Any public comment on undocketed items? Going once, going twice, 3 times. Public comment is closed. I'll take a motion to adjourn at 9:07 PM.
Make the motion.
Motion by Vice President LeBlanc. Second by Councilman Pasqua. All those in favor? All the opposed? The ayes have it. We are adjourned.
Councilman